Sri Lanka has stepped up its war against the Tamil Tiger separatists. The 5-year-old ceasefire agreement is in tatters, and the government seems more and more determined to pursue a military solution. But what are the costs? With widespread reports of abductions and disappearances, extrajudicial killings and torture, is today's Sri Lanka beginning to look like General Pinochet's Chile? My guest today is the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister. Rohita Bogalagama, welcome to the program. It seems to your critics around the world that you've finally given up on seeking a political solution, and your intention now is to impose a military solution on the country's civil war. Is that true?
I must tell you straight off that we are pursuing a negotiated settlement. There is no military solution that is in sight, nor is it in our minds. And our government, President Mahinda Rajapaksa, is committed to seek a negotiated settlement. Towards that, the entirety of 2006 was spent on building the Southern Polity consensus. And today we can approach a negotiated settlement with greater confidence. And today we are negotiating even with the LTT, and we want them to come to the negotiating.
Nonetheless, those negotiations are backed up by a very determined and to some extent highly successful military offensive. You've cleared a whole patch of territory that used to be in rebel hands. It's now under government control.
But
your air force is bombing from the air, your navy is bombing from the sea.
What do we expect a sovereign state to do? We need security for the people. We need the national security at most. And rebels or terrorists can't dictate to a sovereign state. And we are prepared to negotiate with the terrorists in order to bring about lasting peace to the country. Nowhere we are going targeting the civilians. We are their subjects of our country.
Well, we'll talk about civilian casualties in a second, but the cost of pursuing this military line in parallel with the political process is 200,000 internally displaced in the last year or two, 20,000 who have fled to India on small boats and been dumped on sandy beaches, and many drown on the way.
I'm sorry to state that where do you find these figures coming on, people going about in small boats, 20,000 numbers? Where do you find these figures coming? In the first place, the fact that there are 90,000 Muslim refugees still living in camps because they have been cleansed because of the ethnic cleansing that was practiced by the LTT in Jaffna. They are still lying in the camps for the last 15 years. They are also seeking to get back to their location.
Minister,
and at the same time,
nobody denies the nature of the LTT, the enemy that you face. Nonetheless, the decision to go for an at least partially military solution has displaced 200,000 more people, hasn't it?
I'm glad that you are now reducing the impact from a total military solution to a partial military solution. I'm glad that you change your mind so fast. And that is what I'm also trying to seek. By the end of this discussion, I'm sure you'll be convinced that we are not pursuing a military solution. We are committed to a negotiated settlement. We have to protect our people, their security, and against the tyranny of the tigers. And after all, you also said, they are not good ones. After all, there are no good terrorists in the world. And that is unfortunate reality that we have to face with. And we have sacrificed a lot.
Amnesty International accuses you of failing in your duty to protect civilians. You accept that civilians have died as a result of the actions of your armed forces?
When? I would like to know when.
Well, for example, November the 8th last year, 45 civilians killed at Vakarai in the east of the country.
Not a single civilian has died.
According to the Sri Lankan monitoring mission, they counted 23 bodies and 135 injured as a result of bombardment by your forces.
Yes, there had been enough and more incidents of where the civilians had become casualties. And because when there's a conflict. But at the same time, Vakarai operation had been one of the most successful operations where we had to clear the LTT of the type of situation they were creating to the lives of the people. How they came to...
And civilians got in the way, you accept that?
Civilians never got in the way in Vakarai. And that is one of the most endorsed operations by the military in terms of clearing an area from the clutches of the LTT where they were depriving the lives of the people.
Let me give you another example. On August the 6th last year, 15 aid workers killed, probably murdered, not caught in crossfire, at Mathur. And again, the Sri Lanka monitoring mission said that the security forces were responsible and that the government denied the monitors access to the area to carry out an
Also, there's
investigation.
currently an investigation on that, where we have got even the Australian forensic experts to determine who was killed. And they died. In fact, Muthoor was in the control, under the control of the LTT at that very particular moment. And how could the forces access that location? And that is the concern that we have. After all, the SLMM is not a judicial body, and to determine in terms of forensic evidence and eyewitnesses being called in for to testify.
Despite the allegation,
the biggest problem that we are facing today, distortion of facts.
By the Sri Lankan monitoring mission?
No, I don't say that, the Sri Lankan monitoring mission, but
well,
I
they say in no uncertain terms that those people were murdered by Sri Lankan security forces, and the question they ask is, why has nobody been charged with those murders?
In fact, how can we charge people unless we have a police investigation and the inquiry? There's a rule of law in our country.
Sri Lanka is a net recipient of foreign aid, partly as a result of the damage suffered in the tsunami a couple of years ago, but for longer-term development as well, and one of the donors is the United Kingdom. Now, Hilary Benn, the International Development Secretary, has written to you in Sri Lanka to remind you that the money comes with certain conditions. One of these conditions is no instigation of hostilities, and of course your argument is that you haven't instigated hostilities, and no unjustifiable rise in military spending. Nonetheless, you have upgraded your Navy and your Air Force recently, haven't you?
Of course, countries have to upgrade their military capability.
With help from the Chinese and Pakistan?
No, which is a country that can go sleeping without developing their military capability. I mean, we are sovereign states. That's what we are meant for. At the same time, if we just give a reasonable assessment, our military expenditure has gone up from 3% of the GDP to 3.3% of the GDP. And that's how we have looked at it in 2007, how we have budgeted our military expenditure.
The British are quite worried.
I must speak on what Minister Hilary Benn has written to. And we have also replied that letter. And in fact, I had the good fortune of discussing with his deputy yesterday at a meeting with Gareth Thomas, and which we have explained, and there was no issue in terms of one writing and our being able to explain, and our being able to explain properly.
Margaret Beckett, your counterpart here in the United Kingdom, was pretty explicit in her comments after meeting you. She said, the UK remains seriously concerned about the escalation of violence and the terrible humanitarian impact this has had on civilian populations. Both sides need to do more to protect civilians, and we look forward to the publication of proposals for a peace offer which meets the legitimate aspirations of all Sri Lanka's ethnic groups. That's a pretty clear indication to you that she expects you to take action soon.
In fact, that is the very thing that we are doing right now. From the time we came into office under President Mahinda Rajapaksa, his presidency, 30 months ago, we have been committed towards this goal. We raised this matter at the talks in Geneva 1 in February 2006. Then we went back to talks. We wanted LT to come to talks in October 2006 in Geneva once again. And at all places, we were trying to de-escalate violence. That is one commitment that we wanted out of the LTT, that they must de-escalate violence for us to continue addressing the humanitarian interests of the country, because it's a major hindrance when LTT is targeting the human locations.
What are the interesting things that's
targeting the diplomats, they are targeting the politicians, the military, etc. And I must also say what the Foreign Secretary has said is totally in line with what I was also discussing with the Foreign Secretary. The negotiated settlement, the process through which we have a democracy prevailing in all parts of the country, not only in the southern parts of the country, but we also want the democracy to prevail in the two small districts where the LTT is now trying to control by themselves. And we want the poor in those areas.
Let me ask you about a part of the country. Let me ask you about a part of the country where the LTT used to hold sway and where it no longer does. The interesting thing that's happened recently is the split in the LTT. Colonel Karuna, who used to be a member of the Tamil Tigers and now has fallen out with them. What sort of partnership do you have with him?
We don't have partnerships with anybody, because why should we have partnerships?
Karuna's forces operate as a paramilitary organization on territory controlled by the Sri Lankan government.
Now, where do you say they're a paramilitary organization? They're a political party. They are registered Karuna's political party.
There is endless anecdotal evidence from NGOs and other observers in those regions of watching Karuna's men swagger around with weapons under the noses of Sri Lanka's security forces.
That is where we are now persecuting everyone who is carrying weapons around. We don't want weapons. We don't want a gun culture in Sri Lanka. That is something that we have to put behind. And that is the very thing that has caused lives of our presidents, ministers, civilians,
Do you
the
think
military.
he can play a role now that he's
everybody.
left the Tamil Tigers? Can he play a role in the democratic future of the country?
Of course, why did he register a political party if he doesn't have an intention to
Could
play a
you
role?
be chief minister of that region?
People have to elect every chief minister of our country.
Would you, if he were elected, would you support that?
Everybody can come, including Prabhakaran.